So, if they're not team players, I mean, I don't know if I would relate that. If you're not a team player, you're going to get gone at some point in time, right? If you don't want to be part of the culture, like we've got plenty of those, right? So, it's just a matter of weeding them out and getting rid of them.
Today's guest is Michael Kurland, who's the CEO and founder of Be Better Consulting, Branded Group Inc., a facilities maintenance company, and the author of Broken to Better, 13 Ways Not to Fail at Life and Leadership. In this episode, we dive into Michael's journey from hitting rock bottom to building a thriving company, his insights on mastering rejection and overcoming naysayers, and his powerful approach to leadership and culture building. We also explore how he's navigating the evolving business landscape post-pandemic and his passion for giving back to the community. Let's start the show. Michael, thank you so much for being on. Super excited to rip into your book. I got a lot of questions just about the process of writing a book, to be honest, because I don't know, let's call it, give or take 150 pages or something like that.
Yeah.
That's not an easy feat to begin with, just to put words on paper, but certainly to distill it into something meaningful, which, for the record, for the audience, Broken to Better, 13 Ways Not to Fail at Life and Leadership is the book. I got a lot of value here, but I think if it's all right with you, I just sort of want to dig into this book as a means to sort of get some feedback on your mindsets and progress as you've, climbed the ladder. I think it's easy to say, you've got this business that you've had for 10 years and people will look at what you got and think you landed there, but it's probably not that simple.
No. And everyone also thinks like you're a millionaire and you have limitless amounts of cash and why aren't you giving it to everybody else? But anyway, that's a whole nother story, right? So thank you for having me, Marcus. This is cool. I'm excited to be here and fire away.
All right. Well, I'm going to jump a little bit all over the place here. First off, I'll sort of note of the 13 chapters, which distills your thesis on sort of the most ideal ways not to fail, which I'll make a comment about not to fail in a second, but teachable, being future driven, and being inspiring. And I think I want to interweave that throughout the conversation there's a number of other chapters that are really meaningful, but those sort of stood out. But why not to 13 ways not to fail? And pardon me for going down this path here because I go into sports analogies, but I think of golf and people think great golfers are extraordinary golfers, and they are. But really what makes a great golfer is not making mistakes. It's about making the fewest mistakes possible because you got to play the ball where it lies. And I just sort of want to, that's a thoughtful title. I want to hear how you landed on ways not to fail because there's a number of books on how to succeed.
Yeah. So, and I love the golf analogy because I'll tell you, I am not a very good golfer, and I find many ways to fail on the golf course because you do have to play the ball where it lies, and I'm usually in the rough somewhere if I'm lucky. But yeah. So the title was, if you know my story and any of the background, I came from New York 10 years ago. I moved to Southern California. I had just gotten divorced and fired from my job, and I was trying to be better, right? So that's where the better comes from, and broken to better comes from, right? Like I was broken and I wanted to be better. And then 13 ways, we started doing the Be Better podcast a couple years ago, and we started working on ways to interweave, kind of similar to what we're doing here today, some of the better episodes that we had and some of the better topics we had into the lessons that we were learning along the way. So, during COVID, I sat down, and I can't take credit for actually writing this book. I had a really great ghostwriter, Jennifer Cavello, and we brainstormed and we did it chapter by chapter. We pre-labeled the chapters based on the podcast, and then we went back and kind of like tied it all together with the ghostwriting, and that's kind of how this book came to be. So these are lessons that I have learned along the way, and they were things that I talked about in the podcast, and it just made sense to transition it to the book. So
I appreciate you being transparent about that in the ghostwriter because you got a lot of hats you're juggling, and there's only one way to really leverage that because there's only so many minutes in the day, right? So to bring somebody on board to help you. And you go a lot into that in the book in terms of trusting your people, hiring correctly, which I want to go into. But out of the gate, which is a little bit later in the book, but out of the gate, I find something interesting that I wanted to dig into, and I think it was in the Be Engaging chapter, and you reference sort of a trajectory shift, but there's really only one way to reverse the trend: make a decision to change and put it in place. Being mindful of distractions or naysayers that try to derail your success. This spoke to me. My question for you is, what did you find most successful in ensuring consistency? People wake up one day and say, I want to change. I want to be better. I want to do this or that. But it peters out January 3rd or 5th or
Right.
7th when, those goals start to get a little bit stale. What keeps you coming back? What skill set, what methodology would you suggest that, or for yourself, that was successful at being able to continue to show up despite the naysayers? And what sort of naysayers did you encounter? I just sort of want to hear your take on that.
Yeah. So it was when I first decided to do this, I was, it was probably like July of 2012. That's when I found out my ex wife was having an affair. And I was living this very average life. I was making decent money. I had a starter home on Long Island, nice neighborhood. We are going to do the two kids, white picket fence, bullshit. And I was coming home from work and I was drinking a couple Bud Lights and watching the sport, watching the Met game on TV. And at some point in time, like I just wanted more. And what I was learning through going through that was like I had outgrown, whatever she did was what she did, but I'd outgrown her, and or we'd gone in our separate directions, however you want to look at it. And like I hated that. Like it was just so, for me, average, right? Maybe that's someone's dream, but for me, I thought it was my dream. I thought it's what I wanted, and then I woke up. That the affair made me wake up and say, "Hey, there's more to life." And like I only got one of these, right? And I was 32 years old, and I'm like, this is not what I want to do. And I was, it's probably 220 pounds at the time. I'm not a big guy. I'm 5'9", 190 right now, and I still need to probably lose 10 pounds. But imagine 220. Like I was obese at the time. I couldn't run. I couldn't work out the way I wanted to. So there's this. I feel like I was leaving so much meat on the bone as a human, and I was already in my early 30s, and I'm like, man, what kind of life is this that I'm going to lead? So that was kind of like what the laser focus came from. And then when I got terminated from my job, which I saw coming, I'm like, wow, like I gave this company 7 years. Private equity came in on the sixth year, bought us out, and then brought in their own people. And I was the top sales earner for those first 6 years that I was there. And the seventh year, I was like number two by not much. I was close to the top, right? I was bringing in a lot of money, and they didn't want to pay me anymore. And it just showed me like you're just a number in sales. You have to provide value and make yourself indispensable. And so I was like, I don't want to ever put myself in that position again, right? I got offered all these jobs because I was very well regarded in our industry when I did get terminated, and I turned them all down because I'm like, it's going to be the same rat race, right? I'm going to go back in here. I'm going to make my money, but once I make too much money, I'm going to be, shown the door, and on that goes until I get too old to or get too expensive to get a job somewhere else, right? I don't want to be a mercenary. So I said, I don't know if swearing's okay on this show, but yeah, I said, fuck it. I'm gonna move to California, and I'm gonna start over. I had a bunch of clients here, and yeah, my mom. So to talk about the naysayers, my mom was the biggest. She's like, What if you go? What if you go bankrupt? What if you don't make enough money? What if your company fails?" And I'm like, then I'll fucking go get one of these shitty jobs that I don't want to take, and I'll go make money again because I know I can do that. But I don't know if I can start something from scratch and be successful. And so that was the laser focus, man. Do you listen to? I'm sure you listen to music. Do you listen to Aloe Black? Do you know who that is?
Love Aloe Black.
Yeah, so he used to have that song, I'm the Man. So when I first moved out here, every single fucking morning for a year, I woke up, I worked out, and that was the first song I played because I wanted to just like manifest that I was the man and I was going to take it to the next level. I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but if it did, thanks, Aloe Black, for your inspiration. So,
Well, do you think, I mean, that has something to do with it, right? In that, whether it's that song or something, but the repetition, I've heard the phrase, consistency over intensity.
Yeah.
Anybody can get back to the gym and give an hour and a half workout and really crush it after not being there for 2 years. But what happens tomorrow? They tend to sort of wean off pretty quickly. And I think it's a lot more important to go to the gym for 5 minutes for 365 days than it is to go once for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And that's really what I'm sort of getting at. Like, before we sort of go into that, I want to, you mentioned your mom being a naysayer, which I find, any advice you have for sort of combating, and by the way, I think naysayers aren't exclusive to actual people that are out there. There's naysayers in your head that are sometimes amalgamations of other voices you've heard elsewhere. What advice do you have, especially for those close to you, that can sometimes be your toxic kryptonite?
So I think there's two types of naysayers, whether it's in your head, which you make a good point, or it's, someone in the real world, right? There's fear-driven naysayers. Like my mom was totally coming from a fear-based place because she was worried about her son being broke, right? And it's a it's a valid fear for her to have. I don't know if it was the best time for her to express it to me, but it was what it was. And then there's the people that are jealous, right? There's jealousy and like people that wish they could do what you did or had the guts to do what you did or aren't happy with their life choices and are jealous that you're got the I had the chutzpah. I mean, I got in the car, I drove from Lake Grove, New York to Newport Beach, California. It took me like 10 days and I had 50 grand from basically from selling my house. And that was all the money I had, and I was like, oh, it's either going to work or it's not going to work, but I'm not going to let it fail because I'm going to get up every morning. So to your point about consistency, I'm going to get up every morning and I'm going to outwork and out hustle everybody because I know what it takes to get sales in the door and I know what it takes to get the job done. And I know that this industry lacks in customer service. So I'm going to provide the best customer service that I can. And I'm going to do it for, I'm also going to, take care of, when we first started, it was like, take care of your people, take care of clients, take care of your subcontractors, and take care of yourself. Those were the be better to all those four people things. And we really hung on those. And I've stuck as close to those as I can as we've grown. So it's really, helped us. Anyway, kind of a mishmash. Hopefully that answers your question.
No, that's great. And don't be distracted by me my looking away. I'm writing notes here. So I do want to talk about a couple of things here. I also want to go back to the divorce for a second, but let's do that a little bit later. So you came out here to start your facilities management business. You have background in it. I want to dive into that a little bit because it sounds like for the better part of your working career, you were in facilities management, although you may have had a role prior to that. 2001, which I'm a hair younger, so I was toward the end of my college career in 9/11. But I did witness what transpired following that in the job market and the like. So I wonder if you could just sort of walk us through your trajectory from sort of 2001 until the drive, and we could talk about post drive
Yeah.
again.
So, graduated from college in May of '01, went backpacking across Europe with my best friend for like June, July. It was crazy, man. It was crazy because I remember we flew home from Charles de Gaulle in Paris. And I remember being like, man, like, you know, what happened? I didn't like to fly back then. And there was just like a lot of, you know, there hadn't been a terrorist thing in a while. And I was just like, man, I hope nothing happens, right? It was just a random thought in my head, flying home, fearful. And then literally like 2 months later that shit happened, right? Like August, September. And so I had just gotten back to the US. I'd taken the summer off. And I was like, I'll substitute teach because I lived in Connecticut at the time with my parents, and you could substitute teach with a bachelor's degree, and you made $85 a day. And in 2001, making almost $500 a week to substitute teach, I thought maybe I'd go and try and be a gym teacher or something. Big aspirations back then. So I did that for a while, and the first day that I substitute taught was 9/11, and I'm teaching this third grade class, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing, right? Because I've never done this before, and all of a sudden it's like, Mr. Kurland, can you send Jimmy Smith down? Can you every 5 minutes? Can you spend
Man,
Tammy Jones down? I'm like, in my head, I'm like, what the fuck is going on? And then they're like, hey, recess will be inside today, and recess will be inside today, and shut all windows and close all doors. And now I'm like, what the hell's going on? So I took the kids down. They had art class at some point in time. I took them down to their art class, and I went to the teachers lounge. And the kid that I went backpacking with in Europe, his mom worked at the school. And so I went in, and she was like a second mom to me. And I was like, hey, Miss B, what's going on? And she's like, we've been attacked by terrorists. And I'm like, what? And I'm 20, I'm 22 years old. I'm like, I want to go home to my mommy right now. So that was the start of my career. From that point on, the job market went shit, and I couldn't find a job other than substitute teaching. Finally, took a job at Abercrombie and Fitch as a manager, and I kept my shirt on the whole time. But other than that, it's everything that they portray it to be on the TV. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen that documentary on Netflix for Abercrombie and Fitch, but I lived through the era of the documentary, and it's I mean, the stuff about like the models and the guys, the CEO taking advantage of the models. I wasn't on the model side of things, but all that stuff definitely happened. So it was definitely an interesting time. I did Abercrombie for a year, and then that got stale real quick because they wanted me to rate that my employees on their looks from A to F, and fire anyone that was a C or below. And I was like, I'm not doing that. And they were like, I know it's really hard and messed up, but if you don't do this, you won't get to the next level. And I was like, I don't give a fuck if I get to the next level. So that
In
didn't,
2024, it's hard to imagine that was ever that was an
dude,
acceptable form of
watch. It's
employment.
all that stuff is in the documentary. It's very interesting. I mean, it was more interesting for me because I literally I worked there when all the main stuff in the documentary happened. Like, it was like the height of Abercrombie and all the things that they were trying to get away with, and they got away with for a long time. But yeah, I was like, I'm not. Who am I to judge how someone looks? I'm like, and they're like, well, this person is a C. You need to fire her. And I'm like, that person also consistently shows up every morning and opens my store. Who's going to do that? I'm not firing her. No, no way. So anyway, we left Abercrombie. We went, did some odd and end sales jobs at a couple of places where it was. I sold telemarketing for magazines, for you know industry savvy magazines, and that was it taught me how to make cold calls and get rejected for sure. And then I did sales for commercial cleaning equipment. Same thing, cold calls, rejection, and I hated both of those jobs. And then that's when I got to 9 West, Jones, New York, and became a facility manager there. I ran 300 stores. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was in charge of maintaining 300 stores nationwide for the Jones Apparel Group at the time. And I learned so much. I learned, facility maintenance. And that's when I went to then Empire, which became Front Street, and was their VP of sales, 3 years later, and was there for the last 7 years before I moved out here.
It's interesting. So you bring up the sales quotient. I grew up in, my mom had sort of a negative perception of sales, and she let me know, let me know that, and anything be commission based. And so I think I grew up with a sort of a negative perception of it. It's not surprising if you think about it that I ended up in that, because that's oftentimes where monetization happens. But no matter what you're in, sales is a component. In sales, if you take away any connotation of sleaze or what have you, it's storytelling, it's relationship building, and it's rapport, it's engaging behavior. And so I always think about a lot of my most successful colleagues, friends, are those with high analytical brains who've gone through engineering school or what have you, that also develop the emotional intelligence and the ability to storytell. Because when you take these two things together, you can actually create sort of a pretty powerful 1-2 punch. And I bring that up because to be able to take the skill sets that you acquire from being a facilities manager with the sales history and background that you have, I can see that giving some credibility to your idea internally, at least, that you could actually put something together. And you mentioned the cold calling thing, because I'm familiar with cold calling as well. There is a rejection that certainly comes through, and it's not uncommon. and it's something that can really derail you. And I'm going to quote a page in your book. You go, when the rejection comes, many new salespeople let fear take over. I'm just going to pause for a second. Fear, going back to the one of the two ways you describe naysayers sort of infiltrating your mind. And then I'll go back to your quote. They start asking themselves, what if I don't make my goal? Am I going to lose my job? Don't let yourself go there. So I'm going to ask you a question, and it applies to sales, but it also applies to driving out. It applies to grabbing your own shingle. What have you found to be the most effective way to keep from going there? How do you avoid, because no matter what level you're at, and I find this truer and truer from every conversation I have here, in private, elsewhere, within myself, that doubt rears itself in different ways, but it doesn't go away. And it's not about sort of absconding from putting yourself in that position. It's about developing the skills to manage when that arises. And I'm curious, what did you find to be so effective to keep you moving forward, getting up every day?
Well, I think there's a lot of ways to answer that question, and I think I still, to your point, I still have the fear, the doubt, on a daily basis. Is just finding ways to quiet that fear and doubt, right? Starting to like celebrate your wins pretty, instead of like I used to push my wins into a corner, right? I would land a big account and I'd be like, okay, on to the next thing, right? You gotta pause and celebrate that win. That is a big deal, right? Because then if you don't celebrate your wins, your losses and your doubts become louder. But there's a lot of different things that I've done over the course of time. Going back to not wanting to be average, I sat around and I one of the first jobs I had was at this place called Goodway Technologies, and we sold industrial cleaning equipment to higher education, hospitals, whatever. And it was a burn and turn. You sold machines, but you also sold all the consumables, the brushes, and everything. And I looked around that room and like these guys were just out of shape and didn't care about like they were just stuck, right? I was like 24 and I'm like I do not want to look like that guy when I'm 44, like they hated their wives, they hated their lives, like they looked forward to like I don't know, they're like drive home and that one beer when they got home or whatever it was. And so like I didn't want to be that. So I pushed myself to say, I don't so I'd always tell myself like I don't take it personally. I don't actually know this person. It's fine. And I would just push through that way. And then my wife, who used to work for me in sales also, she taught me something which I still use to this day, which is 3, 2, 1, fuck it. And when you have fear about something, just say 3, 2, 1, fuck it and do it and then just get it over with. Because once it's done, it's really not that bad. Right. And I think that there's a lot to be said for like, don't overthink it. Just do it, right? Like how bad can well, okay, you got hung up on, make the next call, right? And I think people get lost in like they take it personal, like, oh my God, they hung up on me and what who cares, right? But it's hard, right? Like, when you're first doing it, because there's no one to really guide you on that whole journey of rejection. And people don't like rejection. People do not, they hate it. They hate it. They can't deal with it. When you got broken up with your girlfriend or your boyfriend when you were, 16 years old, like how long did it take you to recover? And then when you were in your like 20s, you were like, all right, maybe she wasn't the right one for me, right? So you learned a little, you had a little more experience, you felt that rejection, and you moved on, right? So
I think that so. It's funny that you said that because I have found the closer you get, the sooner you get to fuck it. Not that you don't care, but that it's not going to stop you. You don't value that rejection the way it should be. I mean, growing up, that was the 3 second rule before you saw a girl that you wanted to go talk to. If you don't do it in 3 seconds, you're not going to do it,
right.
and you don't know what you're going to say. But sitting around waiting for it's not going to give you the answer until you're there. And life rewards action, and the more action you get, the more data you have, and the better you get, the faster you get. So I think there's a lot of truth to that. I'm wondering, you mentioned your wife, your ex-wife, and I don't need to go down that path in particular, but I think, a lot of times, I think especially kids think about, what I want to do with my life. But in reality, in order to find what you want to do with your life, you really have to identify what you don't. And again, going back to life rewards action, you have to go through some jobs that you don't like. You have to go through some life situations that you don't like to identify with more certainty what it is that you do. And that applies to personalities. I mean, when you're a teenager, you're very different than when you go to college and post college. And hopefully, you're a different person in your 30s and your 20s, and certainly 40s to 30s, right? And it keeps going. What did you take away from that experience? I mean, having a divorce at that point in your life where you had achieved some success, you had some stability, it requires a not insignificant amount of chutzpah to double down on yourself, right? You took the 50 grand, you drove across the country, and you said, if I'm going to gamble with anything, I'm going to put it on me. What do you take away from that experience? And, and to some degree, was it an organic revelation that you might not otherwise have compelled yourself to come to?
Yeah, so good question. And I want to before we go into that, there's a couple of things that I would like to just address from what we were just talking about. A couple books. So there's a book called I think it's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. I
Mark Manson.
Yeah, that book is great for exactly what we were just talking about because it just deep dives 150 pages into what we just talked about, like the care of what who has the power to like really make you feel a certain way, and giving less cares about not people that don't really affect you on a daily basis type thing. There's way more to that book, but that was a great book early on for me. And another one back to consistency is Atomic Habits by James Clear. If you if you haven't read that book, that is kind of when we were talking about like how did I get up with the naysayers and just do it every day. I read that book early on, and it's like it's very bite sized. Try to get 1% better every day, and after 100 days you're 100% better type thing, and it really just builds consistent. It's written by a pitcher, that didn't quite make it. College pitcher, to go back to sports analogy, didn't quite make it, and he wrote this book on how to be better, and it really spoke to me. And it's a nationwide bestseller. So if the audience is looking for some things to read at the end of this, those are two books that I'll recommend 10 out of 10 times, right? So
I'm familiar with both those authors. I follow them quite a bit, so I think those are really good suggestions. I want to sort of launch into when you came out here and you started your business. I mean, there's a lot of different directions we can go there, but I get the hustle. You start picking up the phone, you start developing business, you end up bringing in somebody else to start working with you as well to help sort of feel the load. And between the two of you, you guys are CEO, CFO, sales position, head of HR, procurement specialists, all of the above. I'm really interested on the transition into bringing people on board. And there was one in particular passage that you had referenced regarding in the hiring process, and it was really about problem solving. If they have the aptitude and the motivation, the actual experience may not be as important. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. Problem solving, I would sort of define as agency in many respects. It's the ability to identify resources, to formulate your own solutions with your own head. I'm curious, what did you find in that process? How did you go about selecting? What have you found to be most effective in identifying problem solvers? And do you see that problem solvers then take the next step, because you can be a good problem solver but a horrible communicator or a bad team player? Where does that rubber meet the road for you?
so when I was at the previous company, nobody would like, especially when private equity came in, nobody would make a fucking decision. It was like, okay, this customer's pissed off because this bill came in double what they were expecting. And it was like, well, what do we do? Should we? And then it would like bubble up to the CEO, and I'm like, dude, just cut the it's $5,000. Just take 2 grand off and make them happy, because we're all about customer service, and if they're happy, they're gonna send us more work, and then we'll make back that $2,000 that we lost. Like, that's not gonna make or break our year. but like nobody could make a decision. And I'm not talking about like low level employees. I'm talking about like directors and like, VPs. And I'm like, everyone was just cowtailing to the CEO and trying to make sure that they didn't get in trouble. And I'm like, man, who the fuck hired these guys? Right. So one of the biggest things I look for, you said, I said problem solving in the book, but it's decision making, right? You got to be able to like critically think in a situation and say, okay, for that example, this customer is pissed off. The job is overpriced, and like if they have some sort of merit to their anger, and we shouldn't have charged that much, fix it and tell me about it later. I don't need you to like call your boss to call his boss to then call me to say we have $2,000. Like my time is way more valuable than figuring out if an invoice is whatever. And that's just like a small example, but along the way, you got to be able to critically think. So like to your point, are there other things that they need to learn? I can teach you the industry. It takes time, but I can teach you the industry. But I can't teach you to make decisions and have the confidence to make a decision. And I always preach to my people, make a decision. And if it's the wrong decision, you can't really fuck something up so bad that like we can't fix it, right? So I'd rather you make a decision and it be the wrong decision and then we use it as a teaching tool than for you to not make a decision, freeze, be paralyzed, and take 5 days to get back to the customer who now has gotten pissed off for 5 more days that we haven't gotten back to them. And to do what you probably thought was the right thing to do in the beginning, and you just didn't have the confidence to make that decision. So, if they're not team players, I mean, I don't know if I would relate that. If you're not a team player, you're going to get gone at some point in time, right? If you don't want to be part of the culture, like we've got plenty of those, right? So, it's just a matter of weeding them out and getting rid of them. I don't care. There's a book called Radical Candor. Have you ever read that?
I have not, but I'm familiar with it.
So they talk about in that book like A, B, C, D players, and it's like a I don't know what the graph's called, but it's like a four. There's four quadrants, and like you can be an A. Like A is like the perfect player, right? Their team culture and their work hard, and then you got the D's who are they work hard, but they're terrible team culture. The B's they don't quite work as hard, but they're good at team culture. And then the C's are bad at everything, right? And you want to eliminate the C's, right? Easily. You want to try and power up the B's to become better at their job because they're already team players. The A's are fine, but the D's are the hardest ones because they do their job well, but they're assholes. And so it's hard to fire the person that is performing, but as a cancer inside your culture. But they talk about how getting rid of those people is also very important because it maintains the equilibrium of the culture and whatever. So anyway, just another book that you kind of pinged me in my head on. So
That's good. On that point, I sort of want to dive into that culture wise. You talk a lot about building the culture, and it really seems centered around service orientation. And service orientation can be defined by a number of different ways. But two that come to mind when I think about what you broke down were obviously providing service to your clients. That's number one. That's what makes the machine go around.
sure.
But the second, which seems to be a priority and a passion of yours, is service to your community. So I'm curious how you built that culture and how you implement it into the D players, if at all. How do you start to prioritize that? How do you wean people out of the system if you're starting to see a misalignment relative to those priorities?
So we have a couple different programs. We have the one for one program, which currently we donate a meal to Feeding America for every service call that we complete. How it started though was we partnered with Habitat for Humanity in Orange County where we're located, and we would give a minute of service for every service call that we completed through our people. And that was a good program until we just got so big. Like I would be hiring someone full time to just work at Habitat for Humanity, and that I'm not in the business of doing that. It's not good business, right? So we moved to Feeding America because we think everyone should have the opportunity to have meals. We're actually going to Mike Rowe. Do you know who Mike Rowe is?
No.
He's the host of that show Dirty Jobs. So he has a program because I don't know if you know this, but there's a trade skill gap. When we were, you're right around my age, when we were going to college, it was like, you have to go to college. Trade school is for dummies. You go to college and use your brain. You don't want to work with your hands, right? Because I think our parents were that generation of like tradesmen, and they worked really hard, and they were like, I want better for my kid. They need to go to college, right? Well, guess what? Now we don't have any fucking tradesmen anymore because we had a whole generation, like a big gap of the generation not go. So there's a lot of aging, a lot of boomers are aging out of the plumbing, the HVAC, the electrician. So Mike Rowe has a foundation that we're looking to partner with. We are going to try and get it off the ground in 2025, where it's going to be, you know, some sort of donation for every service call that we complete to his foundation, because I think it just aligns better with what we're trying to accomplish.
How do you find out whether people are going to be on board with that from an employee perspective when you bring
Um,
them into the
I think so.
culture?
So it's funny because we're 10 years later, right? When I started the company, the main source of our newer employees was millennials. And millennials wanted a purpose. They wanted to, they didn't, salary, if the salary was close, they'd rather go to a company that was about giving back and having a purpose and giving them a purpose as opposed to just making profits for an owner. But now, 10 years later, we have the Gen Zers, and I haven't figured them out yet. They're a different breed. So I'm working on that. I'm trying to figure out what makes them tick as much. Um, I'll hold any negative comments that I have, but just what makes them tick. So I'm trying to figure out what makes them tick. But so when COVID hit, we went fully remote, and I want to touch on that because that has been the biggest challenge. We used to have a very good culture where we'd come into the office, and when I got to the office, I would walk around and shake everyone's hand and say good morning and how was your evening, and I'd spend the first 20 minutes of the day just talking to the people, right? And we had that camaraderie. We had a water cooler. People were talking about whatever made them tick, the Dodgers, or the probably not the Angels, but the Dodgers, or whatever TV show that people like to watch on Netflix or whatever. And then COVID hit, and we took a hit to our culture because it was, we lost that personal touch. I used to know everybody by their first name. Like, I can tell you people's first names now because we've kind of like leveled out on who we've had working for us for a while. But there was a growth period where I didn't know some of the people that worked at Brandon Group, and I didn't like that. And I wanted to travel around the country and get a chance to meet everyone. And then I had a baby, and that really derailed. I mean, I'm glad I had my child. I love my kid, but like traveling in the first year, I've learned is not the smartest thing to do if you want a happy wife. So, so, so from a culture standpoint, we're really trying to find like what works in this hybrid world now that we're in, of like work from home. And I got people in 21 different states. There's people that have never met each other other than on a Zoom call, and maybe they have never even met on a Zoom call because they're in different departments that don't interact. So I got to try and figure out how to bridge that gap. But to answer your question, I don't know if they will align with that or not. But I think it's a very noble purpose and it's very aligned with what Branded Group overall does. So not to say I don't care, but I think it just aligns with our values. If I left it up to the people, I can tell you this. I know this. I've done this study. If you leave it to the people of what they want to invest their time in and their like purpose in, do you want to guess what it is?
Themselves?
No, no. If we pick a charity, like well, pick a charity, just any charity that you think that people would like be really aligned with. Like, yes, we should definitely be behind this.
I won't even guess.
So we always, when we went to the show, we go to the shows, right? And you've been to trade shows in your industry, I'm sure. And everyone just like when I first started going, everyone just gave away these tchotchkes that ended up in the
Yeah.
landfill anyway, right? So we started doing this. If you gave your business card, you could vote for. We would donate $10 for every business card we got, and if we got, when we got the business cards, we would donate that money to a voting system of either the food bank, the local food bank of the town we were in, the Veterans Association of the town we were in, or a pet adoption place. Every fucking time people chose the pets. Like, I don't think we ever donated anywhere but to like animal rescues, and I love animals. I've got a rescue right here. That's who you heard barking earlier. But I want to, I think Branded Group needs to align with something that's going to help the future of the industry that we're in. So
That's great. I think that's a really bright idea, innovative way to engage with potential prospects. You mentioned remote work because I wanted to talk about this. So at the beginning, yeah, how big were you? I mean, once you guys got past two people, how many people were in the office?
year one, I think we had like 8 people by the end of year one. And we had an accounting department, which consisted of one person. We had, one admin that was like answering the phones. And then we had like me and the officer and like six, no, 4 people like doing the actual operations. So
And then how big were you at your peak before 2020?
225, I think, was our biggest. And we were doing
All in the office.
no, in the office we were probably 130, like kind of what we're at now. We were kind of 130 in the office. Is that right? We were probably like 80 in the office at our height because we had remote employees. So we probably had 80 in the office at the height, but it was the majority of the company at that point in time.
And then through the pandemic, talk to me about that. Did that increase your ability to recruit from broader geographies?
Yeah. So the only thing that sucked, I mean, there was a lot of things that sucked about the pandemic, but what we learned from that, the downside was we had just signed a 7-year lease in 2018, and so we're almost done with that. But we've used it. We used it for about a year and a half, and we paid it in full because we are good. We're a good, upstanding people. We're not going to try and not pay our lease. So yeah, it opened up the door because we had dipped our toe in the, coming from New York. I had a lot of employees from New York. I had a lot of former employees in New York, and they wanted to come work for me because they bought into being better. They bought into the purpose, and I mean, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but they believed in me. And so when we dipped our toe in that, we got a bunch of people in New York, and then we just had an opportunity to expand to the Vegas market. There was a lot of people that we had hired from another company out here that had recently sold. Like we opened in 2014, I think they sold in 2015, and they laid off their California office and moved everything to Vegas. And then they sold again, and they laid off their Vegas office and I think they moved to Dallas or something. So there was all these people in Vegas that knew the industry, that knew people that worked at our company, and we probably have like 20 people in New York right now, in Long Island for the most part. Some live in Manhattan and Brooklyn, and then we have 20 people in the Las Vegas area, and we have people in South Carolina, Florida, Connecticut, Massachusetts. Uh, Forgive me for the rest of the company. I don't know. There's Texas people for sure.
Scattered, yeah.
Scattered, yeah. I mean, we have almost half the country covered with Branded Group employees, at least one.
So what's the future like? I mean, now are you guys in the office, at least the SoCal employees? Or you have a mandate? What's the
We
policy
go
there?
once a month. We do an in-office day once a month. We've tried different iterations of it. We go once a month to see each other. We have a vendor come in and present so that they can like get to know the team. We do a little happy hour at the end of the thing because I've learned people want to get home to their families. They don't want to be, out late. And we do it on a Wednesday, so it's like kind of breaks the week up. And we do it once a month. So I think that iteration we've been the most successful because people know it's only once a month. And even at once a month, people still complain about coming in for one day. But I don't know what the future holds because our lease is up in October. I don't want to renew because we have so much square footage that's just not, I don't think it's conducive for what we're trying to accomplish. But I wouldn't mind a smaller space, and I wouldn't mind, making it a weekly thing. But I also enjoy working from home. I have a 2-year-old, and being able to spend, my downtime with her during the day and coming home, being home from work within a minute instead of, 45 minutes. It's just been life changing. It's been a nice change of pace and I get a lot more done because, you know, you probably know this. Like when you're at the office, you get a lot of people want FaceTime, right? Whether, however you want to say it, they want to come in and they want to ask you a question. They want to talk to you for 10, 15 minutes. And sometimes I'm in the middle of shit and I'm like, I just want to pump this workout. Can we do this later? So now I can at least live by my schedule a little bit better. And if someone wants some time with me, we can schedule it, and it makes a little bit more sense. So
Yeah, I sort of think post-pandemic, think of the VCR. My parents were very resistant to getting a TiVo at the time. I'm like, you can record everything you want. And they're like, well, I can do that with a VCR, but it's like, oh no, it's totally different. And people, I think industries that thought that DVR recording was going to be a way of the future ended up being left behind. And I think the future holds office occupancy. I think people are going to come back to the office more than they are now and have been. But it's hard to put the cat back into the bag because there are a lot of efficiencies that can be taken away from remote work. And especially where, you know, nothing beats being in person with people and developing those relationships. But to be able to have an ad hoc meeting without having to get in your car and go somewhere, it certainly is beneficial on a timeline, especially in SoCal where, traffic is
the worst,
considerable.
the worst. Whoever master planned LA did a terrible job. But but yeah, to your point, like I want to get back in the office on maybe a better, more consistent cadence, but I don't think I ever want to go back 5 days a week. And I think I would get a lot of pushback. I think people would quit their job that because they really didn't want to go in, and whether it's for childcare aspects or, lifestyle aspects. And so I got to balance those things out. But I've thought about this, and you're in real estate. I'll ask you this question. Like, sure, there's going to be in office is going to increase from where it is now, but that's still never going to, I don't think it's ever going to go back to where it was. So what do we do? What do we do with all that B and A, B and C like space? Warehouse is one thing, right? Because there's always going to be use for that. But I'm talking about that B office space that we have right now. Like it's 10 floors. It's probably, if I had to guess, 50 to 60% occupied right now. And it's, we're paying probably $3 a square foot right now, which I don't think anyone's getting $3 a square foot unless you're like Beverly Hills or something, right? So I'd love to hear your opinion on where it's going to go.
If I had the crystal ball here, I'd be making a lot more money.
Right? That's
I
what I
don't.
said too.
I think it's going to be industry specific, certainly company specific, which is a nice, easy, dodgy way to not answer your question, to be fair. But I certainly think it's going to swing. I mean, you look at the non-farm payroll adjustments that just occurred last week, and not surprisingly, with I think it was 13 or 14 consecutive downward adjustments that the federal government made in what was being reported. All to say, and Jerome Powell now is saying the time is now to cut. Why are those two things related? Because I think to some degree, what the headlines have been about a robust job market may not really be an accurate sentiment, an accurate statement about what's really happening. And unemployment has climbed, but not to alarming levels. But where am I going with this? The further that pendulum swings, the greater employers' leverage will tend to be in recruiting talent that is willing to come into the office. Now, to your point, I do think even decision makers have to admit and witness the values of some component of remote work being involved. But is that 1 day a week or is it 4 days a week? I'm not the right person to answer that. I think it's going to be, there are certain industries, certainly like in marketing, for example, or entertainment, where you sort of need to be in the office around other people. But I can also see how other businesses may not require it quite as much. So, to your point, I think the rubber's meeting the road now. I think there's starting to be a little bit more stability. Potentially we're hitting a peak in the negative swing in the economy. Hopefully, maybe not. But to the extent that's the case, and the Fed starts to lower rates, hopefully we can start to see overall transaction volumes, and certainly any company who's using debt, which is of the majority, if not 100% of your clients, are going to start to loosen up a little bit, hopefully, and maybe we get back to commerce being similar to what it once was, pre-pandemic.
Yeah. I I don't know. To your point, like if we figured that question out, we would both be wealthier
Fair
people.
enough.
I do think though, I have a theory, but I don't know how, you know, well it will be taken. But I think, we have this housing crisis, right? Why can we not rezone and remodel a lot of these office buildings to be apartments? I mean, it wouldn't take a lot. It would, I mean, I guess it would, but you know, I think you could do it and get
I
some.
don't disagree with you. I think there's two sides of the equation. There's more, but the ones that I tend to sort of focus on are, well, one are the city permitting processes and entitlement processes. They're not Los Angeles certainly, and I know Orange County to some degree mirrors this. Is not an easy are not easy places to get through the city for permitting, and you certainly need to adjust permitting. But then second is that there is a considerable capital expense to transitioning those facilities into housing projects, just from bay depths, HVAC usages, plumbing. The risers aren't intended to have 30 units on a floor. They're intended to have three or one, right? So I think that cost has got to be borne to some degree by government entities to help offset, what development costs, because developers are not in this for, they're
Will.
not nonprofits,
Right.
and so they're not going to be, there needs to be some incentive for them to participate. But I'm neither a developer nor in the city. So I do want to transition before we start to wrap up here. Your consulting business, and I want to hear more about that, but I'm wondering if you might just sort of address that question through this one, which I'm going to allude to, and this will be sort of the first of the wrap up round here. But in section 6, in your chapter 6, which is Be Purposeful, you say, as your company evolves, these facets of your business will need to be continually reevaluated. What worked in your first year won't work in your fifth. It's really about being agile. You have to be able to adjust and course correct as your business grows. And through the lens of sharing, what your consulting business is, and sort of what services you're providing in that capacity, what did you find, or what advice are you giving to those clients relative to what may have worked in year one that doesn't in year five? And how would you approach solving those issues in year five?
I mean, yeah, it's kind of what you just said. Like, it's just being agile. Like, a, the problem with being an entrepreneur, and I think you can attest to this, is like you are good at what you do, which got you to the place where you're at. So you start to believe your own bullshit sometimes, right? And if you're not willing to put your ego in check and take a deep dive and have a self evaluation of what you're doing and what your company's doing, and you are going to your point, you're going to get left behind, right? You're not going to be able to adapt, like you were talking about with the DVR, right? So it's 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 being able to constantly challenge yourself instead of thinking about how you made it and you did so well to get to where you're at. And like, for if you're not I always say, if you're not evolving, you're dying. So if you're not trying to like improve upon where you came from every day, you're going to get left behind at some point in time. And that I very very much believe that as like a mantra. So that's what I tell the people that I talk to, right? It's like, this has worked for 20 years, sure, but like the industry's changing. COVID's changed everything. What, the way we're doing business, to your point, are we at a bottom? Like, we've felt it. This year's been probably our worst year from a top line standpoint, because it's an election year. The economy is not great, and everyone's fearful, and they're holding their money close to their, at least our clients are holding their money close to their vest. So like, how do you combat that? And if I keep doing what I've been doing for the last 9 years, it's not going to work. I gotta make changes. I gotta assess the situation and make changes. So that's kind of like what I say to my consulting clients. And and everyone's different. It's I got one who's a small business who's trying to grow, and I got one who's a multi-$100 million business, and they are trying to really get better at the culture aspect, right? So it's just a matter of what are you trying to accomplish, and what are you seeing. You're not coming to me because everything's good, right? You're coming to me because you have holes in your company that you recognize. So
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because I think one of the chapters that did catch my eye was about being future driven, and I think that applies to business as much as it does being a person. In that, when you fixate your identity on the current position, there's a tendency to start, like you said, getting static, and the growth can cease because you are who you are, and that's what you've done. But to identify with a future self of who you want to be, what you want this company to be, it compels growth, it compels evolution, it compels sort of shedding of the skin to some degree. And in so doing, there is no alternative except to be a student of that process because you can never master it from behind. And so long as you continue to sort of cast it forward, I think it helps to generate some compulsion on the engine, so to speak. And so, on that note, I guess I wanted to ask you a couple wrap up questions. One, what's your day to day like? What getting up in the morning and going to bed? What's an ideal day? How do you tend to structure it to extract the most value?
so I don't believe in alarm clocks, and I know that sounds crazy, right? But I have a almost 2 year old girl, so she's my alarm clock. So she wakes me up about, let's just call it 7 a.m. every morning, which is good. Get up, it's the best part of my day. My wife will sleep till about 8, and me and the baby get up, and I got an hour with my baby girl and make her breakfast, give her milk, play with her, watch a little Miss Rachel. If you don't have kids, that's you'll find out who that is when you do. And then usually when my wife gets up is when I'll go outside and I'll do my workout, and I have a trainer that comes a couple days a week, or I hit the Peloton, or some yoga, some meditation, some journaling, all that stuff. Hit the sauna, just get my mind right for the day, because I have ADD. My brain is going a million miles a minute, and I gotta calm it down before I can dive into something, because then I can come in hot sometimes, right? So then once that's all taken care of, try to also walk the dog in that little time frame. And then I hit my meetings, between nine and 4 or 5 in the afternoon, whatever comes that day. If I can step out with my wife and grab lunch, or take the baby out to lunch or something like that, that's always ideal. Uh, and then by 5, I kind of try and wrap up, wind down, have dinner with the fam, and then again spend some time with the wife and the kid, and play, watch some sort of Disney. I've watched every Disney movie there is, and that's okay. And we put the baby to bed at 8, and then me and my wife have usually about an hour to two of downtime for us. That's a typical day during the week. So
And then, what's your mind diet? What are you reading? What are you listening to that's moving you right now?
I just read Breathe by James Nestor. Nothing to do with business at all, but I have asthma, and it's very. Have you ever? Do you know who this? Have you heard this book about this book?
I've heard of this book.
So
Yeah.
this guy has asthma too, and he went into this deep dive about how we got the human race got to be where we're at, right? Because 250 years ago, asthma didn't even exist, allergies didn't exist, right? And he's deduced we've all become mouth breathers. We have we eat the most processed food that we've ever had in our life, so our jaws are more sunk in than ever before, and our nasal passages are the smallest they've ever been. It's so interesting. Anyway, I read that book, and I have asthma, and it's I don't know if it's changed my life, but it's given me some tips on how to combat my asthma. Um, but other than that, I got to start a new book. I've got a couple that are on deck. I haven't gotten to one yet though, because I just finished Breathe. What about you? What are you reading?
Right now, I'm in the middle. I tend to have a few different books that I read, but right now I'm in an Eckhart Tolle book, which I'm sort of late to the, I guess late to the punch here. But The Power of Now, which has been really influential on my.
It's literally on my nightstand. So you just chose the next book for me.
It's been really powerful to me because like I think there's a lot of benefit. People talk about therapy, which I've had some of, and there is benefit there. But I think journaling has that same effect. But really, I'm not interested in sort of going back and wallowing in something. I'm more interested in sort of identifying skill sets to deal with them more effectively, to manage it, and that's been a really helpful book at this moment in my life. So, um, before we log off here, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you, and what type of people would you want to hear from, if at all?
I mean, I love connecting. You said it earlier. I'm a salesperson. It's like storytelling and fostering relationships. I love connecting with people. So it doesn't matter if you're interested in having a conversation. I'm happy to talk to you. www.michaelkurland.co, not com. If you go to com, it's like an 85-year-old author of like mystery novels, and we get mixed up. I actually, if you Google him, I am his picture right now because Google has kind of got us messed up because we're both authors. He's a way more accomplished author than I am, but yeah, michaelkurland.co. That's where you can hit me up for anything for the consulting or whatever. And if you want to check out Branded Group, it's www.branded-group, BRANDED, not Brandon. We've had that problem for 10 years. It's not Brandon's group. People think I'm Brandon all the time. It's branded-group.com. So,
Awesome. Thanks for being on. I really appreciate it. And any closing words?
no, thank you, Marcus. It's been fun. I love these like open, free flowing conversations. Good luck to you on this podcast, and I think you're going to do great.
Thank you, man.